Jane Low, and I'm at OT-ISAC Summit 2023 here in Singapore. And with me today, I'm very pleased and very privileged to have two guests. They are John Lee, who is the Managing Director with GRF, and also Thian Chin, who is the Senior Director with GovTech. And they will be sharing with us the highlights of the OT-ISAC Summit, which stands for Operational Technology, Information Sharing and Analysis Center, as well as some highlights from the Operational Technology Conference that was organized by the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore 2 weeks ago. So basically highlights about operational technology over the last 2 weeks held in Singapore. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for inviting.
Thank you. So John, I'm just going to ask you very quickly to give our audience a brief introduction about ISAC, because I think, and information sharing in the context of ISAC, because I don't think that many of them, have heard of that before.
Yeah. ISAC started in the late 1990s in the US from a Presidential Directive-63 and also the Homeland Security Presidential Directive-71 that actually mandate information sharing for critical infrastructure sectors. And that started with the financial services, because that is one of the key areas where there are a lot of transactions, economy is being dependent on this very key and critical area. So the ISAC provides a safe harbor for information sharing for the members within that sector. And FSISAC has grown tremendously. And throughout the years since it was born in 1998, we have had numerous requests from different sectors to each share information. And sector services was formed within FSISAC, and it grew too big, such that in 2017, it was spun off as a Global Resilience Federation. Right. And over the course, in concurrently with the growth of FSISAC, there were other ISACs outside of GRF and FSISAC that were set up.
That's right.
The Space ISAC, Water ISAC, Sports ISAC, numerous ISACs. And why is this so? Because they focus on sector-specific information sharing. But a common thread among all these ISACs is that they follow a common protocol called the Traffic Light Protocol, where they are color-coded. TLP rate means sharing between two parties cannot get out of the two parties. And TLP Amber plus Strict means sharing between two parties can be shared with the party's organization. TLP Amber means sharing between two parties can be shared with the party's members, as well as the service providers that provide services to the organizations. TLP Green, sharing within the ISAC, and TLP Clear is public information.
So this is TLP Clear, right?
Definitely, yeah. We are going public. It's definitely TLP Clear.
You're right.
All right, okay.
I'd just like to add on why we are here. OT-ISAC was actually part of the Singapore OT Cybersecurity Masterplan in 2019, key trust tool where sharing of information among the critical information infrastructures in Singapore.
Right, yes, and I'm just going to come to you now, Thian Chin, right? You were there at Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore during the early days when OT-ISAC was set up. And obviously that was set up in 2019. Right, and that was where I guess there was still some very prominent cyber threat incidents, right? Like the Ukraine just happened, 2 years prior, and then there's a Triton malware as well.
Right.
So there was a lot of threats back then, but there was even more after that, especially during COVID. So in your observations, as when you were in CSA, which is Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, how has information sharing in OT-ISAC evolved?
We will, if you understand the why behind why we need to create ISACs, right? If you look at cybersecurity as the nature of cybersecurity has a very adversarial kind of. The fact is that there are groups, there are people out there, threat actors out there who are trying all their means to exploit you. And they are not just doing that by themselves, they are sharing information among them. They are sharing all the techniques as long as it makes it work. Even even different parties who have never worked before come together to share. The question here is, why shouldn't the defenders, the so-called the targeted victims, aren't we sharing information? Because our adversary on the other part is sharing, and then why aren't we? So that's the first question. And then the next question, and this alludes to, ISAC becomes that safe harbor, that platform for the organizations or the different parties with vested interests, the different business line, come together to share. Because their common goal is how do we then exchange information to reduce the risk that caused by this threat actor. So I think info sharing platform has been overwhelmingly useful. It was a long journey since feels like a long journey since from the conceptualization, implementation, and then all thanks to John and his merryman. We kind of they really worked hard to put this together, all right, and really create that trusted platform to bring people to come and share information in a safe and confident and trusted environment.
That's right. Yeah, trust is very important.
Trust is the crux of it, I think.
Yeah.
So I think then, driven by all these external threats, I think more and more we should think about how do we share information beyond structural platforms such as ISAC. I think there are plenty of opportunities for conferences for community to come together. All right?
That's right.
And then the more diverse the kind of practitioners, whether are you from the vendor side, you are on the buy side, the organization, or even from the regulators come in to have a conversation, all right, around table, I think then we can better even our odds against the threat.
That's right, yeah. I was going to ask you about, the partnerships between not just the public and the private sector that you just mentioned, but also between law enforcement as well, as an ISAC. And obviously, the ISAC has, in GRF, you have more than close to 20, but not quite 20 ISAC members, right? 17. And there's also sharing between, I guess,
ISACs.
Different ISAC and industry verticals. So there's a lot of sharing. And I think a lot of people want to ask, so what are you guys sharing? It's not just indicators of compromise, or it's also best practices, standards, I guess incident response playbook, maybe TLP, amber and red sort of categories of sharing where you actually go and discuss about the potential threats that you see are quite imminent. So these are all the different types of sharing. So it's not just pure technical sort of, binary files, is it?
I think the basic sharing of information, looks at the strategic threat landscape, cyber incidents and vulnerabilities, threats and vulnerabilities, and also technical indicators of compromise. But most valuable than indicators of compromise is the tactics, techniques, and procedures of the threat actors. Because if you stop those techniques, and procedures, you would actually prevent that threat adversary. And they have to reinvent the wheel and come up with different tactics, techniques, and procedures, which is their modus operandi. So we share those as well, contextualized to the different environments, 11 critical information infrastructure. And as you mentioned, best practices, we just had the OT-ISAC Summit conference, and there was a lot of sharing of best practices.
That's right.
Which the attendees can actually take back and adopt within their organizations to have a more safer and more cyber resilient infrastructures.
I would also add, I think one thing I really like about OT-ISAC is also getting the vendors, with the OT manufacturers to join in as part of the partners of the community. Getting these folks in serve a few purposes. All right? One, they could better connect with their so-called potential customers going forward to understand how does design by security looks like in their product. Two, looking at offering capabilities that can kind of make the life of the threat actor, we so-called in a defense term, right, more difficult, built in their product. And also openly talk about what are the kind of capabilities, that defensive capabilities that the customer will want. I think some of these things, the conversation is rich. It doesn't have to be happening on a sales pitch, but rather coming in a more neutral ground to hear from each other. I think OT-ISAC actually served that purpose of bridging really as a nexus to bring them together.
Facilitate that kind of discussions, right? And I was going to ask you talk about this conversations between the vendors and also the practitioners, but I was also going to ask you, OT is quite, cybersecurity has an additional sort of complexity to the traditional IT cybersecurity, right? Earlier we hear how simple things such as patching is more difficult in the OT environment. Even implementing two-factor authentication is more difficult in the OT environment because sometimes very frequently you don't have signals. So how are you going to use your phone as a 2FA? So simple things like that we take for granted in IT, and OT adds an additional complexity. So I just want to ask you, how is that conversation between OT engineers and the IT cybersecurity professionals? How is that gap sort of narrowing?
So I think gone are the days. I think I would like to think this in this community. I think we have progressed collectively in terms of understanding that the IT folks and the OT folks need to work together because the problem statement they are dealing with is the same. It's a threat actor out there who's trying to disrupt the thing. And then instead of just working in silos, they can come together to actually increase the odds against the attackers, sort of make it more difficult. Which requires in the earlier conference I talked about the whole concept of how do you do secure deployment, how do you involve the engineering folks to design non-IT stuff, manual, control stuff, insert it into your practices to manage the consequences or the fallout from a cyber attack. I think that is a very powerful part because you not only involve the process engineers, you are making use of things in the industrial control system world to actually stop. It's not just about piling it with more IT security products and things like that, which adds on to the complexity of things.
Actually collaborating, right?
Collaborating, exactly.
During the day.
To add that security is a business issue, so it's not a technical issues where the technical folks, the CISO or the CTOs problem, but it's actually a business issues because it can stop the business operations. And for CII, it's actually more mission critical because it can actually stop the whole economy, impact citizens' life, from functioning normally. If you run out of water, electricity. And so that's how we position it to the senior management, the C-suite. I think the conversation must not be about that it's different. It's part of the business, and it needs to be embedded within the business processes that you actually consider security, just like safety. By the way, you need safety.
It's about safety, isn't it?
So exactly. To John's point, right? Today, I dare say that if a cyber incident happened in an OT company, the CEO or the board is going to summon in that table CIOs, chief engineers, CTOs, everybody. If these people are gathered to solve the problem against the cyber, then all the more I'll argue in peacetime, these two groups should work together to integrate and co-create the processes, right? Rather than first time you meet each other during the cyber crisis, I think that will be very sad. Right?
I think it's the culture, that is slowly beginning to change. The mindset, from a reactive to a proactive culture. So I think proactive is best because when things are calm, you put in the effort. For example, incident response, you practice, right? You can afford to practice and practice till you get it right. That in a cyber incident, you are 95% sure of containing the incident.
Is there sort of like a way to maybe invite more engineers to conferences like this, for example? Or there's already engineers?
There are.
Our
target groups are engineers, CISOs, and
in fact,
IT as well.
Yeah, I think the OT-ISAC is doing a very good job in doing that. The audience today is that my personal wish list is that we can reach out to the C-suite. Invite them because after a while, it's go beyond the processes and you need to set the structure in the company, the platform. These are the leaders who need to bridge the gap between the two, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about the culture, the processes like that. And the leadership, C-suites are the one who understood the problem, understood what needs to be done. They are not doing the engineer's job, but they are creating platforms to bring engineers and IT folks together. All right, to solve the problem.
And C-suites make decisions for the company. They are hired to make decisions. And I think we need to include them in the conversation for cybersecurity.
That's right.
Because that's something that, it's now left to the CISO and the CTOs.
And I will even argue, if I may, the C-suite make this decision and make this change is better than regulator coming in to enforce this kind of thing.
That's right.
That's if the C-suite can drive this, that's good.
I think at the OT event that was organized by the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore 2 weeks ago, there was a lot of talk about mission critical goals. Right. So risk managing based on those goals rather than based on
based on pure
threats.
compliance.
Correct. So I think we are going in the right direction. Right. So the other question that I want to ask is, the last two conferences, we always hear the terms air gap and zero trust. But today we hear a lot about, security by design, security by deployment. Tell us what's the trend?
I think we are slowly, looking at the blurring of the boundaries because we have the OT-IT separation, air gap. But today, if you look at digitalizations, applying sensors, IoTs, IoTs, IOMTs, those are actually bridging the gap between the IT and OT, and also, of course, increasing the risks. Attack surface is being increased. So therefore, it needs to be considered as one, not handled in silo, because the danger is if IT and OT is handled separately as different cybersecurity issues, there may be a gap that is not handled.
Personally,
I see what you mean.
Yeah,
Okay.
I thought that all these terms, jargons, be it zero trust, be it air gap, whatever we have spoken about today, security by design, security by deployment, will never really go away because those are daily operational challenges. But what I saw in terms of over the years, the conversation has matured.
Right.
Even with air gap, people are talking different perspective of air gap. I think that's a growth to me.
That's right.
It's
yeah.
not the same old thing about it's not a binary issue. If I air gap, but rather the conversation has become more enriched to talk about application of air gap in many instances, in many applications.
Right,
What does
yeah.
that mean to
It has
different
matured,
people?
yeah.
It has
Okay.
matured. I think that to me, I take a step back, look at the older group. I think it's good. And we should continue to bring in diverse views to challenge even these old thoughts.
That's
Okay,
right.
so that's one part. The second part is about the different implementation techniques. Zero trust is just one of the means. It's a concept. I personally, I've not seen a mass scale zero trust implementation in an OT environment, but people are talking about it in the IT environment and see
Right.
parts of it.
Yeah.
All right. It remains to be seen. All right. I think there are both upsides and downsides. Zero trust itself can be a very complicated or complex rather implementation.
That's
Right.
right.
If it doesn't do well, actually it kills the organization, in my opinion, rather than bring security to it.
That's
So
right.
I think people understand it from different angle. But I think the crux is that people moved, people grow and matured, getting more perspective on this.
Yeah, so on balance, what John and yourself are saying is that the conversation has really progressed.
Progress.
Yes.
Right, so we're no longer just applying sort of marketing terms.
Indeed,
If
indeed.
yeah.
It has to go beyond the marketing
That's right.
terms,
We're
and we have to
going to-
constantly
right.
remind people, practitioners at the end of the day still have to come in to
That's
say
right.
it makes sense, to say what are we doing, why are we doing this, what risk are we reducing.
Right, okay. So my final question then, I know that we can talk on and on, but my final question for the day is, what does success look like from an information sharing point of view? So I start with you,
Sure.
since you're to my right.
I think to me, the success look like I look forward to the day where we can really have diverse views.
Okay.
Even really there are, conflict in the sense of conflict of ideas, conflict of implementation approach between the different parties.
Okay.
I think, from the audience perspective, we get the most out of it if we have different views, and more people can step forward to share, even if it's from the victim's perspective.
Right,
Right.
I think that's
the
the
day,
difficult
yes,
part.
if the victims can come out and say, I'm a victim, I'm here to share what worked well for me, what didn't, I think that would be the day we can give a pat on our shoulder and
Maybe
say
you
we
can
have
get
done
rid of the traffic light protocol that will get everybody to share on your ground.
It takes
And then
more.
the bad guys will get the information.
And
as
it
well.
depends on the culture,
That's true.
right? It depends on the culture. So I think the day we can have this diversity and victims coming forward to share,
Yep.
I think we'll have
That's right,
that's
yeah.
more successful.
More case studies, yeah.
Yeah.
What about
Looking
you? What do you think?
4 years ago, when OT-ISAC was set up, and today, I think a lot has actually progressed in terms of the willingness of the stakeholders, the engineers, or the asset owners and operators to actually consider looking even at this topic of OT cybersecurity.
All right, okay.
And I think to me, success, besides, I think I agree with Thian Chin about information sharing of the cyber incidents, to help other members within the community to actually take the steps to protect themselves against the same threat. It's about looking at best practices and having a rich community, asset owners, operators, the OEMs, OT solution providers, a system integrator, and certs, government agencies and non-government agencies as well to share information. Of course, you mentioned regulators as well, so that the more our bigger our source of information is, we are better able to contextualize the information, to correlate the information, to arrive at a certain information or certain point that we need to actually use that information to solve the problem that we find. And also, secondly, it's about best practices. We talk about standards, frameworks. Standards and frameworks are just guidelines. But the willingness to adopt these standards and frameworks, I think, are important. But it's also how you apply it within your organizations. So OT-ISAC actually facilitated that dialogue a lot in the conferences we had. And also, I believe that in helping people to understand the importance of information sharing, as well as the sharing best practices, and we connect the stakeholders together.
That's right. Yeah. It's sort of like a rehearsal of incident response in some ways. You get to know your counterparts in conferences like that. You get that conversation going. So when an incident actually happens, you kind of know who to contact.
This point about those people who have made certain things work on their own context and then share the know-how, how to implement this, I think it's very useful.
Very valuable.
And this is where the OT-ISAC can link them together.
That's right. Yeah.
Somebody has done it before, you may want to talk to this person, find out how.
Yes. So basically, real-life practical lessons. All right. Okay. So thank you very much, John and Thian Chin, for your time today to share with us, the latest on OT-ISAC and your perspectives on how it has evolved since 2019, and how success looks like. And hopefully, we'll get more of these conferences going and more sharing, and the track actors, will eventually become less of a cat and mouse game.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Very
Thank
much.
you, Jane.
Thank you.